Hey there, everybody. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar on Logistics Rewired. Keep dangerous goods moving and on board. This is part of our ongoing efforts to keep everybody informed about what's happening in this current global logistics challenge. And you may know notice that those who have been here before may notice that things have changed a little bit as we have just deployed a new app to make the experience even better. So before we begin, let's cover a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you will see a sidebar to the right on the main stage. And anytime you need assistance during the webinar, please message us in the help chat. You can also ask questions through the Q&A throughout the webinar. We will monitor those and answer as best we can. Your question will only be visible to you and the Flexport team. And as I said, we will do our best to answer every question that comes in as time allows. And on the top of the screen, you will find additional information about our dangerous goods services. An on-demand version of the webinar will be sent to you shortly after we conclude here today, and it will be accessible using the same link that we sent to you earlier. So as we go through this, of course, there is the legal disclaimer. So please keep in mind that all the information provided in this webinar today is presented based on the situation at the time and, of course, may not be valid for your specific situation. So I should probably have started with sharing. My name is Michael Baekbol. I am the Senior Director and Head of Compliance as a Service here at Flexport. And it has been a joy and honor being part of the Flexport journey ever since 2014. And I am here and very pleased to introduce to you David Maher, our Dangerous Goods manager and also IATA certified instructor. David, please take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is David, and I am the Program Manager of Dangerous Goods here at Flexport. I focus on all hazardous matters pertaining to the Americas and oversee dangerous goods operations, sales, enablement, and strategy throughout the region. As Michael noted, I am an IATA accredited instructor, and I lead certification courses and consultations for both new and seasoned shippers. I joined Flexport in 2017 under the Client Solutions organization, where I most recently was a Client Solutions Manager, where I managed some of the largest clients in our Midwest region. So I'll be walking you through the slide deck today, and without further ado, let's go over what the agenda topics will cover. So we will kick it off with a quick introduction to who Flexport is and our unique vantage point for dangerous goods logistics. We'll then give a quick recap of where the freight market is today and some of the challenges that we're seeing across the globe for dangerous goods shipments. Then we'll share 5 best practices for you to implement now to maximize your chance of carrier acceptance and get your DG freight moving. Lastly, we'll wrap up the webinar with a high-level summary, and if time allows for it, we'll end with a Q&A summary or Q&A session with the group here today. So pretty packed agenda, and let's get right to it. For those of you who are joining a Flexport webinar for the first time today, welcome. We hope you have lots of good takeaways and actionables after today's session. And for those of you who have attended a Flexport webinar in the past, welcome back and thank you for joining again. So Flexport is a full-service digital forwarder and customs brokerage that was born in Silicon Valley in 2014. Our guiding North Star is to create the operating system for global trade and to make it easier and honestly more enjoyable for importers and exporters and supply chain teams to move and manage your freight in a modern 21st century manner. Now, what many of you don't know is that Flexport is actually one of, if not the only, major US forwarder with a dangerous goods training school within it. So Flexport is an IATA accredited training school, and we have licensed to certify shippers and importers in IATA accredited training courses for DG shipping. We are one of the handful of schools in the US, and we've since trained hundreds of students in the last couple of years. All of our instructors are IATA recognized and come from an operations background before joining our in-house DG team. Since we are nested within a forwarder, we create bespoke training content with actual examples and challenges that we experience on the ground from our freight forwarding arm. So our training is known in the market to be really practical and really relevant because we incorporate real life examples and scenarios rather than just basic textbook theory. So for those of you today joining us who are interested in DG training or some of our DG consultancy and auditing services, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can simply reach us at dg@flexport.com. So let's poll the group first to get a sense of who is here in the audience today. Using the tool that should pop up on the left hand or right hand side, please make your selection to this question. Which of the following might be classified as dangerous goods? So you can select household cleaners, false eyelashes, electric scooters, refrigerators, or all of the above.
Yeah, and it's great to see so many people voting. A poll is only fun when everybody plays, so to speak. So please jump in and let's see where we end up. But fun to see how all of the above is tracking, and cleaners are closer a second, and we have a distant third with the scooters. But yeah, looking forward to seeing all the all the votes coming in.
All right, I think we'll give it a couple last seconds. I see some final submissions. For those of you who selected all of the above, or E, that is correct. Actually, all of these items above may be classified as dangerous goods, depending on the material, the amount of composition, etc. So you might be surprised that your false eyelashes, which actually include adhesives, is actually a flammable liquid. And your refrigerators that have a lot of refrigerant gas could also potentially be DG as well. So we'll go into all of these nuances and differences in the next couple of slides, but thank you for all who participated. Okay, so before proceeding any further, we always like to define dangerous goods, or synonymously known as hazardous material, just so we have a baseline understanding among us. So dangerous goods is defined really as any item or material that might pose a risk to health, safety, property, or the environment around us. Dangerous goods can range from the cologne in your closet or to nuclear material. So it really, really runs the gamut. And the industry, the rules, the regulations are constantly changing. And because of this dynamic nature of the industry, it keeps us on our toes here at Flexport, and it creates the need for webinars like this one today. Now, before we share the tips, it is important for us to follow the market a bit to contextualize why it's been so difficult to transport DG items recently. So let's understand the market a bit better and see how we got to this dire situation where we find ourselves today. The freight market has been in a spiral since 2020, largely stemming from COVID-19 and its after effects around the world shortly after. If you can remember way back when, in Q1 or Q2 of 2020, the freight market was expected to be in a free fall. Carriers were blanking sailings and reducing capacity across all modes and just preparing for the worst. But in Q2 and Q3, there was a drastic increase in unexpected consumer demand, particularly in the Trans-Pacific lanes to the US, fueled by stimulus checks, unprecedented amounts of household saving, and one of my favorite terms to come out of COVID, which is revenge spending, which is when you spend a lot, particularly on physical goods, a lot of which could be potentially hazardous, as we were all trapped indoors, staring at our ugly kitchens and getting back pain from uncomfortable chairs while, zoning out onto electronics. So the supply and demand imbalance is the structural macroeconomic backdrop of the freight market today. But the market conditions are further compounded by just challenges like labor shortages. Labor shortages are still plaguing terminals and ports to this day. COVID put a pretty terrible pause in crucial supply chain hotspots, by causing shortages in Yantan a few months ago, Ningbo this past week, and even more domestically on the local US front as well. And the issue with labor shortages from a DG perspective is that hazardous workers are an even smaller subset within the larger logistics workforce. So any DG labor shortage, which are found in warehouses, trucking partners, ports, these effects are really felt and are really compounded by the market context. Additionally, ports are experiencing record levels of freight getting processed, and their throughputs are through the roof. The port of LA and Long Beach had 125 ships anchored or berthed as of a couple days ago, and this was an all-time high. And it's still expected to continue in the next couple of weeks. Our rail and trucking infrastructure is under severe pressure as well and looks to continue throughout this year. And port congestion is probably going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. From a DG standpoint, when you have these containers or when you have this cargo just sitting weeks on end in potentially adverse weather conditions, this creates a really heightened risk for the carriers. So now more than ever, they're more likely to push back on hazardous cargo. This all just snowballs into carrier delays, not only due to blank sailings and such, but primarily actually to port congestion. And this congestion around the world is causing carriers vessels to go out of schedule and causing DG cargo to really fall out of disfavor. Now, this all just paints a pretty grim picture. And to help you visualize this a little bit more, here on this graph, you can see the delta between the demand for carrier space, which is the green line, the planned space from carriers, which is the purple line, and the actual space that is now available, which is the red line. Anchoring this data to 2019, where there was a more equilibrium between the three data points, you can see the dispersion really widen after COVID ramped up in 2020, and when the freight world has never really recovered since. Now, another interesting point here is that the actual space or capacity, as shown in the red line, it hasn't really changed since 2019. It's actually even decreased a little bit, whereas the demand for space has increased by 1.4x. Now, this gap between the actual space and the planned space is due to the previous slide where congestion, equipment, labor factors are all depressing the actual space available to carriers. For DG cargo, this is where that tension between carriers and shippers can be felt. When there's such a high demand for carrier allocation for just general cargo, the carriers would rather de-risk and move general cargo than accept higher risk DG cargo. So on the next couple of slides, we'll take a look and see if this caution from carriers is warranted or not. So
yeah, and we should add also that you are competing for that space with regular cargo. So the more details and the more accurate your shipments are when they're being booked, the greater the chance are they're going to get accepted, of course. And we'll talk more about that. But that's also where it becomes very crucial that you have those of the audience that are importers have a really close working relationship with your manufacturers to make sure that they are dotting every I and crossing every T. And this is some of the challenges that we see on a regular basis at the origin, where we are working diligently with the shippers to get them up to par.
Exactly. Thank you, Michael. So we're actually going to, give you some best practices that deal directly with vendors and how to place bookings as some of the tips later on in the presentation. But let's peek under the hood a bit into the kinds of items that we're shipping during this surge of consumer demand. So we're seeing a couple of interesting trends that relate to COVID and an ever-growing technological world. So the world is obviously seeing a surge in PPE or personal protective equipment being shipped around the globe. Now, this is a increase in dangerous goods class 3 flammable liquids like hand sanitizers, disinfecting sprays, and Division 4.1 items like sanitizing wet wipes and other flammable solid material. Similarly, we are seeing a jump in battery, particularly lithium battery and lithium battery powered products moving around the world today as well. According to IATA and their latest Air Cargo Media Day hosted in May, there has been a 22% per annum increase in lithium battery consumer demand. So mobile phones, tablets, e-bikes, electric scooters. These are all fueling the growth of this particular energy source, with the expectation of even more increasing demand in the future as the world becomes more interconnected in the Internet of Things ecosystem and just becomes increasingly electronic. We're definitely seeing these trends within Flexport's historical data as well. So comparing full year 2019 against full year 2020, we see that our class 3 and 4 shipments increased sevenfold year on year. Our class 9 lithium shipments look like they decreased on a percentage basis, largely due to the significant increase in class 3 and 4 items, but in terms of nominal numbers, our battery shipments have also increased. Now, these two trends in the increase of class 3 flammable liquids and class 9 lithium batteries could be worrisome in the carrier's eyes. Now, for those of you who are aware of the segregation principles, class 9 lithium batteries and class 3 flammable liquids must be segregated when stored, stowed, or transported together, or else there is a heightened risk of DG accidents. And this is actually what we saw in the past couple of months. As of late, there's been an increase in the high-profile DG-related accidents that have really struck a chord with the carriers. In April, a pallet of smartphones caught on fire at Hong Kong International Airport. The smartphone brand is one of the world's most popular phone companies in emerging markets, and after thorough investigations, they found that the likely source of the fire was due to lithium-ion batteries. Then in May, the Pearl Express ignited off of the shores of Colombo and eventually caused the total destruction of the vessel. The vessel was unsalvageable and a total loss. A leak was discovered, and unfortunately, a fire subsequently broke out. And in the investigation after, it was noted that the vessel was carrying 25 tons of nitric acid, which is a component of fertilizer, and other chemicals and cosmetics. In June and July, two of the world's busiest ports, Waigaoqiao in Shanghai and Jebel Ali, all experienced DG-related accidents. Operations were halted, and luckily there were no loss of life, but really rang shots of DG concern across the globe. So one might be wondering, like, why have there been this increase in high-profile DG accidents? And unfortunately, there isn't exactly a clear answer. It could be that carriers and vessels are carrying more DG commodities more than ever, given the two trends we're seeing, or it could be the hot summertime weather that starts in late spring, early June, where the containers are sitting in really just hot temperatures and ignition is caught that way. But whatever it is, carriers are definitely taking note and taking action. Thus, as a direct response to the series of DG accidents, more and more carriers are scrutinizing hazardous shipments and even outright banning DG and lithium battery cargo. So for example, Zim came out with an announcement earlier this year that they will no longer accept loose non-DG lithium batteries as non-DG. Then HMM followed suit and then outright banned lithium batteries entirely. And Shanghai and its surrounding region banned the transport of dangerous goods for more than a week as a result of DG fires and the PRC founding celebrations. And we're still seeing difficulty in moving dangerous goods and lithium batteries in the Shanghai and Ningbo areas today. So if you're an importer here in the US, you're likely impacted because your vendor is pivoting on how they're packing their goods just to adhere to carrier decisions. And there's just been an overall reduction in DG market capacity as carriers are rejecting specific commodities, even if they historically had accepted them. So carriers are taking a much more aggressive approach in conducting their due diligence today. They are performing more physical cargo checks. They are really going through documentation reviews with a fine-tooth comb and just generally de-risking any chance they get. So before we segue over to giving out some of the best practices, we have one final poll that we'd like to ask the audience. So as the poll gets pulled up, can you please answer, have you experienced a DG-related delay, rejection, or fine in the past couple of months? All right, we will leave a couple more minutes or seconds before we share the results. Okay, so overwhelmingly, 66 or 2/3 of participants here today said yes, and 1/3 said no. This is unsurprising, and the reason why we are here today. The freight market has been in a frenzy, and DG cargo is, one of the first items that carriers are looking to potentially offload. So let's go over some best practices to highlight what you can do to maximize your chances of carrier acceptance and to make sure that the carriers do load your freight and keep your DG freight moving. So again, in summary, DG cargo is extra scrutinized. Carriers are really de-risking from the terrible market conditions that's snowballing. And we're hearing, honestly, more and more stories of carrier rejecting bookings, even though historically they have accepted the cargo before. So it's been a difficult few months in the world of hazardous shipping, which is why we're here today. And as an in-house DG specialist center within a freight forwarder, we're able to take these challenges, create real solutions that work, and we're happy to share some of these key findings that we've collected throughout the past. So without further ado, let's share some best practices on how you can keep your DG supply chain moving. The first tip has to do with classifications, namely making sure that the classification you're declaring to the carrier is not only the most correct and compliant classification, but also the proper classification. We'll go into what that means. And if applicable, that you're also utilizing certain exceptions that come with particular classifications. So let's go into an example that demonstrates what this means. So getting a proper classification is the first step in ensuring DG compliance and the first step in learning if there are any provisions that you may be able to utilize. So if you're working with a new item or potentially hazardous material, it's best to send that item to a DG testing lab to get paperwork like the Material Safety Data Sheet or MSDS created by a reputable lab. The important thing to remember here is that you want to send the full end product to the testing lab, not just the potentially DG component itself. Now, once you receive a formal designation on the classification and receive a UN number, you want to make sure that you understand all of the special provisions of that classification. Special provisions are essentially extra compulsory regulations that must be followed for specific UN numbers, and oftentimes create conditions where your item may be allowed to proceed as non-dangerous goods, even though there was a UN number originally assigned. You definitely want to understand any and all special provisions for your commodity because it could save you a lot of money, a lot of effort, and save you from a lot of heartache, especially when dealing with the carriers today. So here is an example. Say that you are shipping a refrigerating machine that includes a non-flammable, non-toxic gas. Now, you send the whole product to the testing lab to get classified, and you receive back that that item, which is the refrigerating machine, is UN 2857, which is Dangerous Goods Division 2.2. Now, again, you don't want to only send that DG component, aka that gas cartridge, to the testing lab, because what will happen is that testing lab will test that gas cartridge and end up generating documents for that gas itself. So that wouldn't be an accurate classification for your refrigerator. So again, really want to emphasize this. Please be sure to send the end product to get the correct classification. So now you have the correct document that says UN 2857 for your refrigerating machine. It's time to really understand the special provisions. So after you consult your DG specialist, you find out that special provisions A26 in the IATA Dangerous Goods Regulation or special provision 119 in the IMDG code state that your refrigerating machine could actually be non-DG if it does not contain less than 12 kgs of gas of class 2.2. So if this condition applies to your machine, then you can actually move this freight as general cargo, which would be much more easily accepted by the carriers. Here is another example that we've seen during COVID times. So say you're shipping alcohol prep pads now, which are classified as DG UN 3175, Division 4.1 flammable solids. Again, you send the item to a testing lab and you get documents made that confirm that UN 3175 is the proper classification for this item. As you look deeper into all of the special provisions of UN 3175, you see that there are special provisions that you can take note of. If you didn't take note of, then you would never realize that special provisions might apply to this cargo. And when you make a booking, it'll likely be DG, and the carrier will likely push back, and there's a heightened chance of rejection. But by understanding the special provisions that apply to this UN number, you see that IMDG code special provision 216 and IATA special provision A46 might apply. And the special provision essentially states that if you have a sealed packet containing less than 10 milliliters of this packing group 2 or 3 flammable liquid that is absorbed into a solid material, then it is not subject to the provisions of the Dangerous Goods Code, provided there is no free liquid in this packet or article. So if this condition applies to your product, then great, you're taking advantage of a special provision that would allow your cargo to move as non-DG. And in that case, when you place a booking, you can tell the carrier, hey, my cargo is actually non-DG because of this special provision, and the carrier should accept it with no issue. So this is the power of special provisions if they apply to your product. And the first step in getting to that special provision step is to make sure you have that proper classification of the end product to make sure you have special provisions that can apply here. All right, so that was the first tip. Now, the second tip has to do with documentation. Documentation is supremely important when it comes to DG shipping and can really make or break your cargo getting accepted. So let's understand some basic documents first, and then learning why understanding the local documentation practices is paramount for DG cargo. So we'll quickly go over some baseline DG documentation that might be applied to worldwide shipments. But don't worry about memorizing this slide. We will go into each individual document, and we'll send you the deck later, and you can use this slide as a general guide in the future. Now, the first document is arguably the most important document. It is the Material Safety Data Sheet, or MSDS. This is a very standard document that details out the material's composition and safety data, and this doc is usually broken out into 16 sections. From a DG transportation perspective, section 14 is the most pertinent section where the MSDS will detail out the proper shipping names, the UN number, the packing group of a particular hazard in bulk. Now, I say in bulk because the MSDS does not indicate how much material you're actually shipping in your actual cargo. It only represents the hazard in bulk. We always recommend having the correct updated MSDS on hand, as this is really a baseline document that carriers ask for. Next is the UN 38.3 test report, and this is a standard document that provides lithium battery safety test results. This document confirms that the lithium battery you are shipping has passed a series of tests that emulate the conditions that a lithium battery might encounter during transport. So they subjected it to a test to test its ability to withstand heat, shock, overcharging, etc. Now, whenever you are moving any lithium battery products, it is always best to have this document, the UN 38.3 test report, on hand because the carriers can ask for it at any time. Next, we have the lithium battery declaration. This is another standard document that provides how your lithium battery product is packed. So for example, if your lithium battery is loose, if it's packed with equipment, or contained in equipment for non-dangerous goods lithium batteries. It usually will detail out specific packing instructions and highlight a 24-hour contact number in case information is needed for this battery. The usage of this lithium battery declaration is pretty common, especially within certain countries like the US and also out of Hong Kong. But it is a more regional practice as well. But it's always good to have it just to give carriers that extra assurance. The Dangerous Goods Declaration is next. This is the DGD or Dangerous Goods Declaration form, and it is a required and mandatory dangerous goods form that details out the hazardous information and can be used as the formal declaration of dangerous goods cargo to the carrier. Now, especially for air shipping, this form can only be completed and signed by someone who is trained and certified. So this form is particularly scrutinized by the carrier. So you want to make sure that whoever is filling out this form and signing it is actually trained to do so. Lastly, the letter of indemnity, or the LOI. Now, this document is important because it declares non-dangerous goods status and nature of the goods and obligates the shipper to take responsibility for any loss that results from a breach of contract. So our advice here is to prepare your legal department to get comfortable with this LOI template because carriers are increasingly asking for LOIs before they accept cargo. Now on to a couple of regional differences. So unfortunately, we are not going to be able to cover all geographies today during today's session. So we'll cover one of, if not the most popular export country, which is China and Hong Kong. China and Hong Kong also have some of the most nuanced documentation requirements. So they are good examples and are indicative of some of the localized rules that exist for DG cargo. In mainland China, in addition to the MSDS document, another mandatory document that is needed for every DG and potentially DG commodity is the Air and Sea Certificate of Safe Transport. These are specialized documents that are created by accredited labs, and again, must be created for the finished product being shipped, not just the DG component. This is actually probably one of the most common mistakes that we see from shippers, but shippers like to just send a piece of the end product being shipped, namely the DG piece. So they'll send a battery or a carton of batteries to the testing lab rather than the product with the battery included. And then after that testing lab receives, let's say, just the DG component, then you get a set of wrong documents because your documents come back as fully DG for that DG component rather than your finished product. So again, just emphasizing this by repeating again, when shipping any DG and potentially DG commodities out of mainland China, always ask for the Air and Sea certificates for the final product, as these will be mandatory to get your freight moving. Now, even in mainland China, not all documentation is made equal. So for instance, in Shanghai, any DG or potentially DG cargo must be substantiated with MSDS and also the Air and Sea cert, but the Air and Sea cert has to come from a specific testing facility, the Shanghai Research Institute of Chemical Industry, or the SRICI. Now, the SRICI is the standard for all ex-Shanghai and PVG cargo. This is a very, very nuanced and specific point and not very well publicized, at least to the English-speaking world. So if you're moving any DG or potentially DG cargo out of PRE or People's Republic east of Shanghai, we highly recommend procuring the compliant documentation from the SRICI. In Hong Kong, you can use your standard MSDS, but if you are moving non-dangerous goods lithium batteries via air, you will also need to provide a lithium battery declaration as part of the booking process. Now, the final point I want to make on this slide is that you can be strategic with the documentation you have to maximize your chances of finding freight solutions out of numerous ports. Having the full set of docs strategic to the region gives you the power to be flexible, and it gives you more options, which is more and more important in the freight world today. So let's go into what this means. So say you have a shipper in the southern region of mainland China. Let's say they're located in Dongguan, China. Now, Dongguan is a very popular city for factories, and it's conveniently located between three major international ports: Guangzhou Baiyun Airport, Shenzhen Bao'an Airport, and Hong Kong International Airport across the border. So, say your shipper only has the MSDS document. Well, in that case, you can only uplift out of Hong Kong International Airport because only Hong Kong will allow departure based on the MSDS. But let's say your shipper has the MSDS document along with the air certificate of safe transport, then we widen the options to include both Shenzhen and Guangzhou, which affords more uplift options and even potentially lower costs. So this is why you can see documentation plays such an important role in DG shipping, which it honestly should, right? It keeps the carrier informed on what is being moved, and it keeps us all safe. So definitely make sure you understand the local nuances before trying to ship out any dangerous goods and potentially dangerous goods to make sure you don't encounter any debilitating roadblocks, especially with the way the market is right now. Now, let's dig into packaging next. The amount of hazardous items you ship directly correlates to the risk of your DG item and directly correlates to carrier requirements that one must undertake to package your goods. Let's see what this means. So just because, again, you have a MSDS that says an item is DG doesn't necessarily mean that your cargo is 100% going to be hazardous. Now, one factor to consider is the amount of dangerous goods material that you're shipping per unit and per master carton or outer packaging. So for example, let's say you are air shipping UN 1170, which is ethanol solution. Now, the MSDS will detail that this is dangerous goods UN 1170, but the MSDS will not go into the detail of how much ethanol solution you are actually shipping. So if you are shipping 50 liters of ethanol solution in one steel drum, then yes, you are going to be quote unquote full DG. But if you're shipping only 1 liter of UN 1170 or ethanol solution, then you may qualify as limited quantities dangerous goods, which has loosened packaging requirements and could save you money. Now, what if you're shipping even less than 1 liter? Say you're shipping 30 milliliters of UN 1170. Then you're shipping a level lower than limited quantities, and now you're shipping accepted quantities dangerous goods, which has even less restrictions. The rule of thumb is the less DG material you ship per unit, and the less you have on the master level of packaging, the less risk there is, which can translate to more potential cost savings from a packaging standpoint. Additionally, carriers are more keen to accept smaller amounts of DG because there's less risk. Now, the key thing I want you to remember about this slide is always tell your forwarder or booking agent this detail. If you or your vendor are placing a booking without this information of the amount of dangerous goods you're shipping, it will likely look like you're shipping full DG, which will be subject to full DG approval process, price, and treatment. But if you tell your forwarder and your booking agent, hey, I'm shipping my DG material in accepted quantities, you are much likelier to get accepted by the carrier, and you may not even need to pay a full DG rate. So moral of this slide is to please inform Flexport or your forwarding and booking agent of this crucial detail. It most likely will make your process so much easier. So here's another example that we see quite often. Say you're shipping air shipping perfume or cologne, which is DG Class 3 UN 1266 perfumery products. Say you're shipping out cologne that's 500 milliliters and there's 1 in each carton. then in this case, your cargo actually qualifies as limited quantities dangerous goods, which comes with the benefit of not having to use UN specified DG packaging, which is more expensive than your normal cardboard box. Carriers are much likelier to accept limited quantities DG rather than full DG, and you may be even able to move this as ID 8000 if your item meets the criteria for this ID number. Now, again, if you don't give your forwarder this detail, you're just going to say, hey, I'm shipping out cologne. Here's an MSDS of UN perfumery products. Likely you will get rejected or you'll get an expensive DG rate. But if you tell your forwarder, hi forwarder, I would like a quote for perfumery products. Here is the MSDS that is being shipped, and I'm shipping it in limited quantities. Then in this case, the team can go and procure a appropriate, hopefully lower cost rate, and you save money on packaging, and it makes you much easily accepted by the carrier, and you may be able to take advantage of ID 8000, which is a pretty unique consumer commodity product that carriers usually accept with no issue. Cool. Moving right along, the fourth tip will be on declarations. So declarations mean how do you book with the carriers and inform the carriers of what your cargo is. The way you declare and the information with which you declare all matters in the carrier's eyes. So let's understand how to do this optimally. Now, making a declaration to the carrier is actually a little bit like an art and a science. Unfortunately, carriers can be quite fickle when reviewing DG bookings, and it honestly depends on the person on the receiving end of the request. It's almost like college admissions. If the admissions counselor is in a grumpy mood, spilled their coffee, it may paint their decision-making process and cause a higher chance of rejection. Similarly, the carrier acceptance team operates almost in a similar fashion. So it's incumbent on your booking agent to leave no room for error or interpretation, and they should explicitly state to the carrier what exactly needs to be booked. So from our experience, we found that the anatomy of the optimal carrier booking is comprised of two parts. First is the name of the actual product being shipped, and then second is the explicit declaration of dangerous or non-dangerous designation of the end product with the details of the material and the reason why if it's not DG. So below in the red and green boxes, you can see the breakdown of the details to include. So if you're shipping dangerous goods, you need to make sure you include the UN number, the proper shipping name, the packing group, and also the limited and accepted quantity amounts if this applies. If you're shipping non-dangerous goods, you need to clearly inform in your booking email that the goods, which should be the end product, are non-DG and the reason why. So please state your special provision if applicable, or any other specific amounts if applicable. This is really the key to a non-hazardous declaration. So we'll go into an example on the next slide. Here is a notorious commodity that really sends shivers down carrier spines: air fresheners. Air fresheners with carbon components or activated carbon or charcoal. Now, carriers are highly hesitant in moving any type of charcoal or activated carbon, as historically there have been DG accidents attributed to the combustible nature of actual charcoal. However, many items today contain activated charcoal: toothpaste, pills, even air fresheners. And just because there is activated charcoal in the name does not mean that there is a significant amount of carbon in the product that would cause the item to catch fire. Now, this is a misconception of the carriers, and this is a prime example of how wording in your declaration can make or break your booking. So if you and your booking agent just simply write, hello carrier, I would like to make a booking and the goods are air fresheners made of carbon, then yes, the carriers will likely push back, and they'll likely think that carbon is the main ingredient, deem it as Division 4.2 goods. It'll be a dangerous goods booking, and I'll be surprised if they accept it. But in the green here is an example of how you and your booking agent should communicate the non-DG commodity to the carriers. So you should say, hello carrier, we declare the goods are air fresheners, non-DG, and attached are the non-DG MSDS and Air and Sea certs if you're moving it out of mainland China. This way, there's no gray area for the carriers to only get enraged with the carbon and delay your shipment. And this is actually the most compliant way to declare your goods because you had already sent your goods to a testing lab. They have already deemed it as non-DG. And by you attaching the documents, explicitly declaring to the carriers that these are air fresheners non-DG, then you are giving them the most correct and compliant declaration. Now, your final tip, make sure your shippers are trained and not only trained, but seasoned DG shippers before you decide to haphazardly start shipping with them. Now, this is super important. So whenever you are experiencing a new vendor or bring on a new product, it all entails bringing on a new partnership or having a new product brought onto market. And these are all subject to local regulations as well as international regulations. The shipper needs to be trained and certified to comply with domestic and international regulations for shipping their hazardous products. So we sometimes see vendors who are not DG trained and certified and cannot sign important documentation like dangerous goods declarations. And then they have to rely on a third-party packing service to compliantly handle their goods. This is all just added costs that the shipper will probably pass down to the importer because the importer doesn't know any better. So if your shippers are not properly trained, that probably means that you will end up paying for that extra DG prep charges when you get that final invoice from them for every shipment. So therefore, every time you work with a new vendor or have a new product, it's imperative to ask them if they have completed the appropriate DG training. And if not, you should push your vendors to do so. But of course, just because you passed the test does not mean that you actually know how to, prepare and pack that material. So many times, shippers get trained and certified, but they still don't really know how to export their DG goods compliantly. So in this case, shippers will make mistakes on documentation, make mistakes on marking, labeling, packing their cargo, and cause delays. So it's always good to get DG trained yourself so you understand the nuances of your product so that you can push your vendors to adhere to the correct practices. Now, on another note, if you import hazardous items from abroad into the US and you proceed to ship that product out, then you are actually now the shipper and you suddenly become subject to all the same local and international requirements if you're shipping out internationally. So you also have to make sure that you get the appropriate training in order to comply with local and international regulations. If you ever do need help with this regard, please feel free to reach out to Flexport. We are able to train and certify you and even help you build out a robust DG program at your company. Great. So those were the 5 key takeaways that everyone should adopt in their supply chain process for your DG cargo to get your DG on board, approved, and moving in today's market conditions. So let's quickly go over just the key takeaways here. First, really make sure you get that proper classification of the end product that you are shipping, not just the DG component. After you get that proper classification, look into the special provisions, which are found in the dangerous goods regulations. So you can refer to your IATA dangerous goods manual, your IMDG dangerous goods manual, or engage with a consultancy like Flexport so we can take a look on your behalf. Second, make sure you get all of the pertinent local DG documentation ahead of time, just so that you can understand, what are the documents that are needed, make sure that the documents are correct for the end product, and look into any surrounding ports, right? Right now, we have to be flexible given market conditions. So make sure you look into all of the surrounding ports and their nuanced local regulations for documentation. Third, sizes and amounts matter in DG shipping. So if you are coming out with a new product and have that ability to dial up or down your actual DG material amount, we recommend you right now to probably downsize a little bit on that DG amount so that carriers are more likely to accept your cargo and for you to take advantage of that packaging provisions, because if it's truly regulated DG cargo, it's going to be a lot more expensive to package. Also, please declare to your forwarder that amount that you're shipping, especially if it's limited or accepted quantities. Fourth, declaration wording is really important. You don't want to leave any room for interpretation to the carriers. Make sure you communicate explicitly and deliberately to your booking agent so that they can pass along the same type of language so that they can communicate succinctly and compliantly to the carriers. Lastly, DG training is paramount. It's a very highly regulated industry. You have to make sure that your shippers are all trained up for that specific product. Make sure you yourself are also trained so that you can keep your shipper accountable, or if you are the shipper, then keep yourself accountable. Regardless, DG training is really the linchpin of DG shipping. So ask ahead of time and make sure that you get all your training and certification in place. Lastly, Flexport is a IATA accredited training school, so we are able to offer a full suite of dangerous goods solutions that meet regulatory requirements. So we can help you with your training. And again, our training is pretty bespoke. It is really applicable, and it's not just theory, it is very practical. So we would love to set up some additional training sessions for all those who need it and really help you understand DG shipping at a more granular level. If you are already DG trained, then you may want to look into our Dangerous Goods Consultancy and Audit programs. We can help you build a in-house program, SOPs, best practices within your supply chain to make sure that you are doing all you can to protect your supply chain and to optimize your operations. Lastly, we are able to offer some DG preparation work out of certain ports. Right now, we are able to offer it out of our Hong Kong location for Class 3 and Class 9 cargo, and we are setting up our LAX Los Angeles operations as well. So thank you all for joining today. We will now open up the floor to some Q&A. We have 7 minutes, and we would love to answer as many questions as possible. So please enter your questions into the sidebar chat. The questions will go directly to our internal team, and then we will repeat back out any of the questions that we receive. I'll give everyone a few minutes before we answer some questions. Okay, I do see a question regarding subwoofers from China and magnetic materials. So for magnetic materials and just sound products that include magnetic materials, they are a tricky commodity to ship out of mainland China. Essentially, you will need either a magnetic testing report created for that particular consignment, and that typically will actually happen at a third-party location that's sometimes nominated by the local forwarder. So anytime you ship out magnets, it will have to be tested, and it's tested by a third party. Just waiting for a couple of other questions here. Why are so many forwarders not taking dangerous goods right now? That is a good question, and I really think it is up to the forwarder themselves. Flexport, we are still actively shipping dangerous goods. We are still also having success when shipping dangerous goods as well. But the key right now to shipping dangerous goods is really making sure you place your bookings ahead of time, really making sure your documentation, all your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and making sure you are able to, deal with that extra timeline where carriers are taking longer to review items, taking longer to approve of different bookings. And I think certain forwarders, either they're not being as strategic in the way they approach the dangerous goods cargo, or they just don't want to deal with that headache or heartache. So my suggestion to you is if your local forwarder is having difficulty and you're not moving with Flexport, definitely try to contact us after. We will try to the best of our abilities to get your freight moving as quickly as possible. But there is, some extra considerations, some timing to take into place just to make sure that we are able to set everything up for success at the front end of the shipment. Now, these are all wonderful questions. I think I can probably answer two more. Let me see if there are any other questions that we can have. All right. So what type of lab would we send our end product to determine DG status? There are a number of recognized labs based on your country. So you can send it, let's say in mainland China, to the Shanghai Research Institute of Chemical Industry, especially if you're shipping out of Shanghai. There are large ones like Pony Testing, Pony. There's Unbotek, which is Anbotek, and a couple of other testing facilities that you can source locally in your country. Now, we aren't endorsing any of them. There's just ones that we see all the time, and we can't speak to their service levels or their performance levels, but they are the more popular ones that we see in China. Now, in the US, there are also a couple of big ones that we see. I would say Intertech is a large one that we like to use because they do make really clear MSDSs. And I think the great thing about Intertech is they are international as well. I believe they're actually based in the EU. So if you actually just search up MSDS authoring or DG testing labs, you should be able to find a number of local testing facilities within your country. Again, we at Flexport don't endorse any of them, but if you do have, if you're interested in getting our opinion, feel free to email dg@flexport.com, ask us, hey, is this lab one that you've had success with? And we can let you know that way. Great. Now I know we have one last question. So I have one final question. How much time should we allocate or plan ahead in securing a shipper for DG? Now, when you say securing a shipper, I will interpret that as securing a vendor for DG. And honestly, it really is going to depend on the type of product you're shipping or the components in the end product or even the country, I would say. So if you're shipping like a more complex item that includes DG components, then I would buffer a lot more time. I can't give you, I would say, a specific timeline. And you have to also consider lead times for products of samples, right? Like if you are shipping anything with a microchip right now, you're going to see lead times of potentially a year or more. That's a really long time before you can secure a shipper. So I would say it really depends on the product, but from a DG perspective, you really want to bring that DG conversation up at the beginning. Make sure you truly understand what is that DG shipper or vendor including in their product, what type of nuances that product may entail from a transportation perspective. And again, send it to that testing lab. Make sure the testing lab is giving you that proper classification because that will entail all of the DG operations afterwards. interpreting
All
this.
right, we are at time, so honoring everybody's time here. I want to thank everybody for participating today, and I also want to just share that this is really hard-learned lessons from being in the field of handling dangerous goods every day, and how we have supported shippers, clients, importers, factories to secure their bookings, and that has had a major impact on actually getting freight out. So to the question about the shipper, I would certainly source and screen your transportation providers and ask them all the tough questions to make sure they go to bat for your bookings and get the space that you need. And of course, book as early as you can and hold your vendors to those deadlines so there's no canceled bookings. But anyway, we're a minute over time, and I just want to appreciate everybody's time today. And thank you for attending. You will get the recording, you will get all the handouts, and there will also be some great tools for you to use, for example, to classify batteries and what have you. And as David said, we are available at dg@flexport.com. I want to thank the Flexport team for putting up the webinar, and thank you, David, for an excellent presentation, and to all our attendees. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, wherever we're calling in from. David is in Chicago. I'm sitting in Copenhagen. We have teams in San Francisco, and we have teams also sitting late night in China answering your questions. So it's a global effort supporting you and your supply chain. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.